How did you find out that the victim was leaving town the following day?
I can't remember that good.
Was it from a blog?
Objection, Your Honor. Leading.
It's not leading, Your Honor. Was it from a blog?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, what blog was that?
The blonde was Wendi.
No.
Do you want the culpable parties held accountable for murdering the father of your children?
Absolutely. I'm grateful they're already in jail.
But not if it's your family.
It's not my family.
I mean, somebody hired him, right?
Not necessarily.
Somebody paid him.
I learned something this morning.
Yeah, me too. You didn't want him held accountable if it was your family members. Didn't you tell law enforcement that?
That's not what I told law enforcement.
What did you tell law enforcement?
I told them that the person who did this should be held responsible and that I had nothing to do with it.
Page 122, lines 7 through 12. If somebody tried to kill my ex-husband, they should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. The investigator says regardless of who it is, and your answer is, I mean, it would be different if I thought it were my brother.
But I don't think it was my family, is what I said.
Different now, isn't it?
No, it's not different. That's exactly
different
what I
today,
said
isn't
right
it?
here. No, that's not
No
right.
further questions.
You are listening to the Roberta Glass True Crime Report, putting the true back in true crime. From New York City, Roberta Glass is now on the record.
Okay. I can't believe I'm actually on. My apologies for being late. The program I use, StreamYard, just would not go live. So I had to be creative and I came up with a solution. So wonderful. I'm so excited. This is one of these days when I am very excited to be doing my podcast, to be talking to you guys. And I'm talking today about Wendi and her trolling of a certain true crime author, Stephen Epstein, who wrote the book on extreme punishment on this case. And he gave a really interesting interview with David Latt on his podcast, Original Jurisdiction. And we're going to be talking about that and his take on, meaning Stephen Epstein's take on Wendi and her actions in or involvement in Dan Markel's murder. So her relationship with Dan Markel, her relationship with her parents, all that is explored in this interview. I find it very interesting. But her trolling is something you don't see often in true crime cases. Someone who's an unindicted co-conspirator putting out their neck and needling, I would say, someone who's writing about them. It's an interesting story he tells. So, but before I get into that, there's news about Donna and her hearing is Monday, 2:30. I hope it's going to be broadcast. If so, I will be on Kick. But it's probably going to be more like very quick status hearing. But I would think that Law and Crime or Court TV would be covering it. So that we have that to look forward to. I would think it would be very quick, but we will get a better idea of when this trial will happen. And if I understood what Rashbaum were saying, or if this is what he was saying, it's a better way to put it, in the interview he did on Surviving the Survivor podcast. I think he's trying to delay it and get Donna to waive her right to a speedy trial. I think he's probably going to persuade her that it's better for her to cool her heels in jail and really have Alex Morris, his co-counsel, up to speed on all the evidence. That's what I got from that interview, but we'll know more Monday. Your comments. My mom was a hit. So last episode, I was talking to my mother about Donna and her take on Donna. And Wendy Gale 3468 wrote, what defense do you think Donna will utilize? The wheelchair defense, the Zimmer defense, the crutches defense, the surgical collar defense, or the full Huzani Murbach of Egypt defense wheeled into court in a hospital bed? I wouldn't be surprised if we see some really interesting stuff from Donna in trial. I've seen people fake faint. I've seen all sorts of things in court myself. I've been predicting that she's going to use the techniques of Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby, which really emphasize their age and their bad health. So I think we're going to hear a lot about her age. I think she's going to really play it up. Also, Robert Durst used this technique. He shaved his head so the jurors could see his scars. Apply for sympathy. I think that's what we're going to see. That's what I'm predicting. We're going to hear a lot about Donna's age because she has no other defense other than, please do not send this poor grandmother to prison. She won't survive. But I feel she's a cockroach. She may survive us all. Patriot Lady 1776 loved listening to your mom. Thank you. She's very wise. And yeah, so this is Wendy's tissues. Someone commented on that, made a very funny comment about the pile of tissues, and she never gets rid of any of it. Yeah, I love the pyramid, great description, Patriot Lady, of dry tissues with not one thrown out. It's so true. Pyramid of dry tissues. That could be the title of Wendy's autobiography, A Pyramid of Dry Tissues. Connie 5768 says, hi, Roberta. I love listening to your very wise and intelligent mother. My mother, I don't think she got one negative review. How interesting that she was able to diagnose Donna's criminal mind. You and she seem to have a wonderful rapport with each other, and it would be fun to hear more of her from time to time. Absolutely. I love doing shows with my mom. And hold on. Irina says, Roberta, Wendy complained and manipulated her loved ones because she had her own goal. She thought that she would put her loved ones in prison and be left with the family's millions. Don't you think Wendy thinks in this category? She certainly participated in this tragedy, but was in the shadow. Wendy was an informant in this tragedy. I hope justice will come to her too. I do too, Irina. But very interesting. I always thought that Wendy lying or what I consider her lying under oath with immunity on the stand was to protect not only herself but her family. So I think that's a very interesting theory that she wants them all in prison so she can have all the money. Certainly they're going that way without her help. But I do hope she is next. It's Miss Lisa, became a YouTube member. Welcome. Thank you so much. And then, oh, wow. Thank you. It's Miss Lisa. And it's Miss Lisa's our new moderator. So thank you, Miss Lisa, for doing it. And thank you to Murder by Maestro and Tammie DV, two other moderators. Appreciate it. Thank you. It's Miss Lisa gifted 10, count them 10 memberships. Thank you. And thank you, Nonanook, for the super sticker. So appreciate it. And I just so appreciate everyone who's listening and was patient. So there's some rumors, before I get into Wendi, there's some rumors. I don't know if it's a rumor. It was in the legal filings of the state that landed January 31st. And it was shown on Deep Dive True Crime channel. This was an attachment, was Donna's phone. And who is this woman? So she's a mystery woman now on the left. Does everybody see the woman on the left? And this was the message on her phone at the time of her arrest. So it reads, I think you're right about that. It would be very, very hard to get a jury in any part of Florida that didn't have preconceived. So I think what she's saying is that every part of Florida is going to be so tainted by the media around this case. That's my read on it. Unfortunately, we can't read the whole thing, but the state submitted it to the defense as evidence that they might use. Murder by Maestro thinks that this woman is Morgan Honeycutt. This is a really young picture of her, who was Wendi Adelson's, I think she's support person in court. She appeared in court many times. Sometimes you'll see her in the background watching Wendi's testimony. So what do you guys think? Does this look like the same woman, the same smile? Hard to tell when it's so small, right? But that's his theory on it. Okay, let's get into David Latt's interview with Stephen B. Epstein. And I'm going to start a little bit into it.
Of Dan's circle of friends, and that I basically had to start picking and choosing who I was going to talk to because there were far too many to interview. I wound up interviewing.
So he's talking about, let me set this up a little bit better. So he's talking about writing emails to Wendi's friends, and he always begins them, please excuse this intrusion, and he'll explain a little bit more.
Probably 36 or so of Dan's friends, and then all of the lawyers involved in the case, and on and on and on.
So one thing people will be curious about is, did you reach out to or hear from Wendi Adelson, Dan's ex-wife, who some have suspected of involvement in the murder, other people have disagreed, but did you ever hear from her?
Yes, I did. So I actually have them in front of me because I want to get it exactly accurate. At some point, I wanted to reach out to Wendi's circle of friends, which was a lot smaller, and easily identify who the people were who I needed to talk to. The first person I reached out to is a woman named Jane McPherson, who was a PhD candidate in the School of Social Work at Florida State. Why did I want to talk to her? She actually wound up in the interrogation room with Wendi the day Dan was shot, and she was there for about a half an hour, and some of what happened during the time she was there was very significant. So I wanted to talk with her. I also wanted to talk with somebody who was a professor on the main campus named Daniel Sack. Ironically, Daniel Sack became Wendi's boyfriend not long after she broke up with Dan Markel. So the two Dans. And so I reached out to both Daniel Sack, who by that point was a professor in Massachusetts, and Jane McPherson, who I think at that point was a professor in Georgia, because their emails were easily accessible from their faculty websites. And I began both emails, and this is significant, my apology for this intrusion. Each of the emails I started that way, and I explained who I was, explained I was working on a book about Dan Markel. I didn't hear from either of them. This is March 20th, 2021. It was a Saturday. So that Monday morning at 10:53 a.m., I had this surprise email in my inbox. And all I could see on my inbox, because I see them only the name of the person sending me the email in the subject line, I saw the name was Wendi Adelson, and the subject line was central character. And it began, "Dear Steve," and here are the magic words, "my apology for the intrusion."
Isn't that so funny that she marks her email, she puts the subject line central character? I find that so odd.
Which right away I found to be somewhat passive aggressive. It's quite clear she was literally stealing my and was central character.
I'm sorry, you just missed a very important part. So listen to how she begins the email.
And it began, "Dear Steve," and here are the magic words, "my apology for the intrusion." Which right away I found to be somewhat passive aggressive. It's quite clear she was literally stealing my words that I used in the emails to her friends, Jane McPherson and Daniel Sapp. She continued, "My apology for the intrusion, but my friends," and I know who they were, "have contacted me about your interview requests. As a, quote, central character in your writing, I am curious why you haven't contacted me. Most sincerely, Wendi," as if we were on a first name basis. I had never had any communications with her up until that point. And the reason I didn't is I knew full well she wasn't going to talk to me. She is implicated. Certainly her family is implicated in the murder of Dan Markel. There's no way she's going to talk to me. So I didn't reach out to her. And I literally said in response to her email, calling her bluff, and I knew it was a bluff, I said, "I didn't think you would talk to me, but if you are interested in talking to me, of course I would love to talk to you, and I won't talk with you about anything related to the murder. I'm interested in your background. I'm interested in growing up in Coral Springs, the relationship you had with your brothers. I'm interested in your appearance on The Weakest Link. So if you're interested in talking to me about those things, by all means, let's chat." And not surprisingly, I never heard another word from Wendi Adelson. But for some reason, I decided, you know what, I'm going to reach out to her again. And I did in October. So some 7 months had passed.
So very interesting. So Wendi, I consider this an intimidation tactic. I'm watching you. I'm watching what you're going to write about me. And I'm willing to sue. I think that just sort of to have Wendi's breath. Unfortunately for Wendi, Stephen Epstein is also a lawyer. And I see the comments. Thank you. The society page is writing, "Don't trust. Stephen Epstein's not trustworthy." Seen other comments. He's compromised. And we'll get into that in a second. But listen to how this story unfolds.
Passed since my interaction with Wendi that she instigated. I didn't instigate. And I decided to push her a little bit and said, you know, I hadn't heard from her and I was wondering if she actually got my email. And she responded within 15 minutes. And within 15 minutes, she said, "Steve, you do not have my consent to use my identity and trauma for your own profit. Best, Wendi."
Best. And I totally agree with you about the wording, the replication of apologies for the intrusion. She's kind of almost trolling you. She's kind of saying, "I've got your number and the people you're reaching out to, they're loyal to me and I know what you're doing." She's kind of yanking your chain, isn't she?
Yes. And if you pay close attention to her testimony in both trials, she does that quite a bit. She has little words and little phrases that just, you know, they're needling. She has this habit of needling. And in talking with people who were mutual friends of Dan and Wendi's, that's what they said about her, is that she would needle them about little things. Like one of Dan's friends was a little bit short and she would needle him about his height. Like not really appropriate, but, you know, as her way of sort of, you know, one-upping him, she would bring up his height. And she was friends with him. So, you know, I don't think she considers me a friend. And she was doing more than needling me. She was effing with me, in my view, with her emails and reaching out and calling her a central character. Yes, she is a central character in my book. There's tons of information about Wendi Adelson in my book that I learned from all kinds of sources, not the least of which is Wendi's own writing, Wendi's own CV, which I was able to find, and then friends of Wendi's that I was able to talk with. So you'll learn a whole lot about Wendi Adelson, and you'll learn a whole lot about growing up Adelson in this book.
Okay, so what is going on here is Wendy's trying to intimidate Stephen Epstein. And she's also trying to shame him by saying, you're profiting off of my trauma. In reality, first of all, let's deal with Stephen Epstein as the comments that have been brought up. He's not trustworthy. So I skipped past it, but in the beginning of this interview, he talks about Adnan Syed had just been released by Marilyn Mosby, who just got convicted of fraud, the state's attorney in Baltimore. It was done without the victims' families' participation on 2 pieces of explosive new evidence. Do you want to hear what they were? So this is the Adnan Syed, Hayman Lee's murderer, Adnan Syed. The DNA on Hayman Lee's shoes, no, not on her feet, but in the back of her car. And Adnan Syed's mentor's wife's witness statement, the notes from the prosecutor describing Adnan Syed's harassment of Hayman Lee before the murder. So one of the great new suspects that let out Adnan Syed is Adnan Syed. This is important because now the conviction has been reinstated while they work out. It was a gross violation of victims' rights, and while they work out what they're going to do with this, what I consider innocence fraud release of a totally guilty guy. So Stephen Epstein announces in the beginning of this interview that Adnan Syed, because he was released, was exonerated, and that meaning that he was innocent all along, and that and you can hear the celebration in his voice talking about it. So anyone who is representing that gross violation of victims' rights or a guilty killer as innocent is I would agree, not a reliable narrator. And then he goes on to describe Wendy's family as implicated in this crime. Wendy's an unindicted co-conspirator. She is implicated in this crime. She's not only a central character. So for her to try to shame Stephen Epstein for writing a true crime book on this case, saying you're profiting off of my trauma, it's more like you're profiting off of my murder, my murder plot, in my opinion. So, and I think that it is also a way of trying to get him to be self-conscious as he's writing. Wendy's going to read this. Is she not going to like it? What she's going to think? And so that he will write more favorably about her. Crazy. Not many people, lots of victims' families won't participate because it's just too hard. But Wendi to do that is just nuts. But I just want to go to this one part where he starts talking about Charlie and Katie McBanaw's trial, what happened there. And he paints a very clear picture of what happened with this one juror. So I wanted to play this. I thought this was very interesting. Why Katie got a hung jury, or how it happened.
Don't have access to what was happening in Wendy's home.
Hold on 1 second. I think I just reversed the numbers. Yeah, I think it's around here.
Well, the alleged go-between between the Adelsons and the hitmen ended in a mistrial. And for those of us who have been following this case, it really saddened us and it really angered us to see how that first trial shook out. But can you explain how this might have totally counterintuitively have been maybe a good thing?
It was a blessing in disguise, as it turned out. So the juror actually hung the juror. I met with the juror in person in Tallahassee and had an extensive interview. And the juror was unabashedly basically nullifying the judge's instructions and decided that these 2 children, not the Dan Markel and Wendi Adelson children, but the children of the hitman, Sigfredo Garcia, and Katie McBanaw, the go-between between the Adelson family and the hitman, that those children shouldn't grow up without 2 parents. And so although she agreed to convict one, Sigfredo Garcia, she wouldn't agree to convict the other. And that's what hung the jury. And that story is told in the book in the chapter called Civic Duty. But as it turns out, between that and COVID, that bought the state attorney's office a couple of years to try and figure out how to put on a better case. You've been a prosecutor. I'm sure you've been part of mistrials before. And as a prosecutor, you want to learn from your mistakes and do better the next time and put on a better case. Well, the one thing in the first trial that left the prosecution team unable to put on the case that they wanted to was not being able to use the Dolce Vita video and audio to show that Charlie Adelson and Katie Magbanua, 2 years after the murder, were basically discussing what had happened in the murder and how to deal with the fact that this perceived gang member was shaking Donna Adelson down as part of the so-called bump and how to deal with that. There was a lot of valuable information in that dialogue, the state attorney's office believed, but it was a noisy Italian restaurant. And if they were going to play it for the jury wasn't going to be able to make out a thing. And so they got the lead FBI agent to literally on his own over the course of 100 hours, prepare a transcript by listening with noise canceling headphones and using some proprietary FBI software. And lo and behold, he comes up with this great transcript. And the judge in the first trial, Judge James Hankinson, says, no, you can't give the jury that transcript because that's basically taking the FBI agent's own interpretation of what these people are saying. And the jury's just going to substitute that for the voices that they're hearing in the actual recording. So they put on 1 minute, basically, of the audio of the meeting in Dolce Vita between Katie Magbanua and Charlie Adelson, just to show the jury.
So that should make us all very nervous for Donna's trial. So why does this story of Katie Magbanua and her hung jury make me nervous for Donna's trial? Because it's about sympathy. So one juror felt that someone should parent, there should be one parent who is free, and nullified the judge's instructions. Said, I don't care how I'm told to evaluate this. I'm going to go by my own sense of morality, which is a juror's right, and go with not guilty and hang this jury. So it makes me very nervous if there's one person on the jury, and that's what Rashbaum will be looking for, who has a real feeling for Donna's age. We can't send this woman who's so elderly to prison. She won't survive it. It's a death sentence, something like that. That's what I'm imagining them thinking. Pretty interesting. But he goes on, wanted to play some of the rest to really correctly, this is before Charlie's trial, to correctly predict how the jury would evaluate the evidence in Charlie's trial. So I'm just going to let it play.
We don't really have anything useful here. So in between the two trials, with all this extra time afforded by COVID, they reached out to several different audio forensics experts and eventually landed one in South Carolina named Keith McElveen, who had spent about 10 years working for the CIA, dealing with this whole issue of how to hear individual voices in noisy, what he calls cocktail party environments. And he came up with 12 different patents, proprietary software, and he was able to get a fairly clear recording for 41 minutes. He missed the first 25 or so minutes of the Dolce Vita meeting between Katie Magbanua and Charlie Adelson, but the last 41 minutes, he got pretty darn well, especially what Charlie was saying. And it was very clear. They were talking about the murder. And at one point, this is why Charlie was arrested. At one point, Charlie literally says, why didn't they know it was me? Why didn't they know it was me? And at another point, he's talking about the money drop. And he asked Katie, when everyone was there the next day, did anybody take any money? I mean, it's not like you're driving around a Bentley, riding around in a Meggie out on the seas. And there were many other things. And I actually have an entire chapter toward the end of the book that is devoted solely to how incriminating Charlie Adelson is in that Dolce Vita recording. Katie, not as much, because her voice is much softer and you can't hear a lot of what she's saying. Why the Dolce Vita audio was so effective for the prosecution of the trial was because Katie didn't do anything like run away or say, what the hell are you talking about? Or I don't want to be involved in this. She participated in this conversation and she chimed in, and you can hear her chiming in several times, basically accepting all of the premises in Charlie's rambling through the course of 41 minutes. And it was used extremely effectively.
It's too bad, right, that the audio files from Charlie and Donna, from Charlie being his jailhouse calls, weren't available for Katie's trial, because if I were her lawyer, I would play those and say, what are you supposed to do with this onslaught of talking? How do you walk away from this guy? This guy is a talking machine, a nonstop monologue. Who could even tell if she was really listening? That's what I would say. But I know that they tried to make a little of that argument, but boy, do those jailhouse calls really bring home that whole thought, aren't they a good example of Charlie being just a talk machine? And can you imagine being on the other end of that? I mean, he really just talks at people. He gives sermons, monologues.
Effectively during Sarah Catherine Dugan's cross-examination of Catherine McBanoa on the witness stand. And I think, if anything, that cross-examination is what sealed Katie's fate with the second jury, who unanimously found her guilty.
And then,
she was terrible on the stand, Katie. I agree. His whole sense of the trial and his prediction of Charlie's trial is very interesting. And I think it says a lot about how Donna's trial could go. Janet Moorcraft, thank you so much. If it is proven that Wendi perjured herself, does she? Yes, she does lose her immunity protection, and that's my idea. And very seldom is anyone very seldom do we see perjury trials. But I think that the state would be smart to try her for perjury to get rid of her any kind of castigar issues, which are very complicated. And I don't know how relevant I would really. I've a lawyer who really went through a lot of it, and a lot of the cases says it really can be very complicated. So I think that would be the way I would go, or try to go, is to first try her with perjury and then bring those charges on her. But we also don't know what they found on Donna's phone. I would think as a lawyer that Wendi would be smart enough not to put anything in an email or in anything in text. So Donna is happy writing these long emails. You heard them, some bits of them in last episode with my mom. She has no part writing these crazy emails. Of course, nothing that she was writing about was illegal. It just really made her look bad in the context of the case. But we haven't seen what was on Wendi's computer. And after the state's attorney Meggs came out and said no one else is going to be tried in this case, meaning or convicted or indicted in this case, the police department, Tallahassee Police Department, released a bunch of evidence to the press. And what was written was that Wendi was looking up Amy Adler's ex-husband after the murder. And in my opinion, that would be to look for another patsy, because Jeffrey Lacoste was such a disaster because he decided to leave early on his trip, thus not driving by the crime scene, looking like he was driving away from the crime scene like she had hoped after the murder. So she had to look for a new patsy. So, yes. So when you get immunity, it is contingent on you testifying truthfully. Okay. Just going to play a little bit more of this.
Of course, that Dolce Vita enhanced recording was used to be the basis for arresting Charlie, which
absolutely,
I know Georgia Kappelman and the state prosecutor's office have been resisting for a while, because understandably, they wanted to really take their one best shot at Charlie if they were going to go after him.
And they wanted Katie to flip. I mean, they thought all that time that Katie, who's going to spend 6 years in jail when they have information that can land a much bigger fish with the prosecutors? I mean, and she did. And who's going to do that? So surely at some point they thought she's going to flip. But after 6 years, she never did. And now she's, convicted and sentenced to life in prison. So at this point, she's made some horrible miscalculations. Maybe she believed her lawyers were so good they were going to get her off. I don't know.
So you don't really have a theory on what I view as one of the huge questions of this case. Why the heck didn't she cooperate? I know Georgia Kappelman at one point said she holds the keys to her own cell or something along those lines. And yet here we are. She's been convicted. She's looking at life in prison. She has 2 kids. Her husband, or the father of her children, is also looking at life in prison. And yet she still has not said anything, right?
And I think that the operative word there is still. So I posit at the very end of the book that it's not too late. And I spent some time on the phone with some bigwigs, some stalwarts in the Florida criminal bar to confirm that it is never too late for someone in their position, even after they've gotten a mandatory sentence of life in prison, which first-degree murder is in Florida, that there are ways around that mandatory life in prison sentence. And if they wanted to deliver the goods, it's never too late for them to approach the state attorney's office. And certainly somebody like Georgia Kappelman and Jack Campbell, the elected state attorney, would be interested in hearing from Catherine McBenowa about all the stuff that they've been waiting for her for 6 years to tell them. And, what kind of deal she can get now, post-conviction, post-sentence, certainly a very different deal than she could have gotten then. And even Sigfredo Garcia, you wouldn't think that he's got something valuable to offer. But the reality is, Luis Rivera is not a terribly good witness after having already testified about a dozen times now. There are so many inconsistencies in his testimony. Sigfredo Garcia has never testified. So even if he just repeated the same sort of things that Luis Rivera has said at 2 different trials, he would be a much cleaner witness to say those things than Luis Rivera. So there probably is a deal there even for him, even if he can't point directly at Charlie Adelson. The reason why it's obvious why he didn't come forward before Katie McBenowa's second trial, because anything.
I think it's obvious to everyone. The obvious answer is that the Adelsons hyped everyone up. And in my opinion, this is my view, paid for their lawyer. And we know a little bit because it was caught on tape. Katie saying that the lawyer, saying Charlie Adelson's lawyer at the time talking to Katie saying, Charlie Adelson's not going to talk, meaning everyone stay quiet. We'll pay for your lawyers, really good lawyers. If everyone stays quiet, nobody's going to go down for this. It's so obvious. And what a stupid thing to do. She would be better off had she taken a deal. Everybody, I'm sure she is kicking herself in prison every day, because now she's doing a life sentence. As Rashbaum says, she only has 2 ways out of there. Cooperate, and I don't think she's told the whole truth about her involvement. So Sigfredo Garcia, I don't think has much hope being the shooter. I don't think that they would make a deal with him.
He would have said would have implicated her. And she's the mother of his children. She's the love of his life. And it makes sense that he was never going to throw her under the bus. And even Katie during the first trial wouldn't let her lawyers say horrible things about Garcia. They had permission in the second trial to do that because he was already convicted and sentenced to life. And they did. And they tried to make it seem like this was a direct conspiracy between Charlie and Garcia. They're the bad people. Katie knew nothing about it.
Right. Right. I love the way Georgia puts that. We got it right concerning this person, but not you. You got it right with this, and this, but not you. It's so smart. Love Georgia Kappelman. Thank you so much. It's Miss Lisa gifting 5, count them 5 subscriptions. Round of banana bread for everybody. So he's going to, we're just going to play a little bit more of this. I think we have, 10 minutes left.
And that never made any sense because the very first thing Sigfredo Garcia would have done upon his arrest, if in fact he had the goods on Charlie Adelson, he would have run to the state attorney's office just like Luis Rivera did. And even though he didn't have the goods on anybody named Adelson, if Sigfredo Garcia had the goods on Charlie Adelson, especially after Katie Mabena was arrested, if she knew nothing about it, he would have sprinted with his lawyers by his side to the state attorney's office to make a deal. And he never did, because he didn't know. They walled Charlie and the Adelsons off through Catherine McBanawa. That was her whole point, the whole point of Katie being involved.
But then there's that phone call. There's that phone call from Sigfredo Garcia to Harvey Adelson at home. And I believe, this is my view of the case, that they made up this story about the jet skis. They're going to jet ski. So Katie and Charlie were going to get jet ski. And the details do change depending on when they're telling it and what they were doing. Little details change about it, it's odd. So he goes from never having any communication with Charlie to picking basically walling off his car and wanting a physical fight with him. And it's very odd that it would start at that level of intensity to my eye. And I think that story was made up to give a reason why Sigfredo, called Harvey Adelson right afterwards. I think Sigfredo knows a bit. I just don't think that he's the talking type. It was only because Luis Rivera was facing so much, already had another case that he was doing time for, that he cooperated and is just smarter and was less involved. It's really hard as the shooter to make a deal. So I'm not buying that. There's another time in this interview where Stephen Epstein says that Wendi must have so many good qualities because Dan Markel loved her so much. What planet is he living on? Horrible people get with nice people, and vice versa. Two horrible people can be together. It's not, that would make everybody on the planet great, wouldn't it? Every married couple great, or have great qualities. If you've been following true crime stories, people marry killers, psychopaths all the time. Does that mean if Wendi were a horrible person, Dan Markel would have to be a horrible person to fall in love with her? I don't want to be judged by my past dating record. I don't know anyone in my audience who would want to. I find that an odd argument. It just made me think of Yoko Ono. Sometimes you hear that argument made for Yoko Ono.
Was to wall the killers off from the people hiring them.
So you mentioned it's never too late. People are now looking at Charlie Adelson. He's sitting in jail. His motion for bail after the so-called Arthur hearing under Florida law was denied. He's looking at a trial early next year. Do you think he could cut some kind of deal? Any predictions about what will happen next? If he goes to trial, does he have any viable defense, especially in the wake of the enhanced Dolce Vita recordings?
Well, according to Daniel Rashbaum, his attorney, his saying 5 or 6 times during the enhanced recording, and I had nothing to do with this, that's his defense. The fact that he fit those words into that
That's going to be Donna's defense too. Listen to the tape with the bump when she called the undercover, and she says, I don't know anything about this. Go to the police. They can give you a reward if you know anything about this. That will be the centerpiece of her defense, I would predict. And look how well it worked for Charlie. His few denials saying he didn't do anything He wasn't involved in this. See how well that worked? They came back in less than 3 hours with a guilty verdict.
Conversation, even though there are about 45 incriminating things that he said that belie the notion, such as, why didn't they know it was me? How do you square those two together? So Daniel Rashbaum has his work cut out for him. And besides that, Charlie Adelson is a very unlikable guy. I mean, if he takes the witness stand, the notion that he's going to charm this jury, I mean, they're going to hear all of these conversations that he's had with his mother, with Katie McBanowa, and they paint him in a horrible, horrible light, as does the Dolce Vita recording. So the notion that he's going to charm this jury into believing that he's an innocent victim or that he was only trying to hire these hitmen not to kill Dan Markel, but just to scare him and intimidate it. I mean, none of that makes any sense. He really has his work cut out. That said, would the state attorney's office make some kind of a deal with him so they didn't have to try this case? We're just talking about the number of years. And would he accept 30 years instead of life? Would they do that? That's a possible deal that could get done. And as you know, as a former prosecutor, most cases end in a plea bargain, not because the person being convicted is ratting somebody else out, but just because the most economically efficient thing for a prosecutor to do is to see if there's not a way to get somebody to agree they did the crime and accept a lesser sentence than their maximum sentence. So that's always possible. There are people speculating, is he going to give up his sister? Is he going to give up his mother, his father in exchange for his own freedom? A, it's hard to believe that anything like that happens. But B, I mean, would that even be something that the state attorney's office would consider? Like, you're the person who paid $100,000 to get this done. You're the person who had the relationship with Katie Magbanua. The fact that you might also be able to give us your mother or your father or your sister, I mean, that's not going to get you a better slice of bread. So at the end of the
Well, I think he's really missing the whole character of the Adelson family, which is one of defiance, one of arrogance. I mean, he honed in on Charlie Adelson's arrogance just, what was it, 3 seconds ago, 1 minute ago, 2 minutes ago in this interview? They're all like that. They will go to their grave saying they had nothing to do with this and the state got it wrong. So I do not expect any Adelsons to flip in this case, because to do so would be to not only expose themselves, but to expose their family. And image is everything to this family. And they're never going to admit that they had anything to do with this. And he's sounding like an apologist for Donna, like Charlie did this all alone through Katie. No help from Donna, and no help from Wendi, and no help from Harvey. And I don't view the case that way at all. So, but pretty interesting. I thought those were pretty interesting predictions. He said, what are they going to do? He's so arrogant that no jury's going to like him. And they're cut to the jailhouse tapes with Charlie Adelson saying, I did great. I don't understand why I got a 95%. Dan Rashbaum gave me a 95% for my, meaning an A for my testimony. Why did I get a conviction? Because the people in Tallahassee are so stupid. I think that's right. Anyone who's not in the Adelson family or is going to support or useful somehow to the Adelson family is going to be looked down upon. Mia Wallace, thank you so much for becoming a member. I hope, that's the character in Pulp Fiction. Great name. Okay. Uma Thurman's character. All right. So, but he does bring up how Charlie Adelson got nabbed. And I think I'm going to take a little break and get back from the break. We're going to talk about that. Stay tuned, everyone. Hold on one sec. Be back in 30 seconds. If you are enjoying this episode of my True Crime Report, please hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and share this episode. Get access to exclusive podcasts and other bonus content by becoming a patron today. If you have a question or comment for me, shoot me a super chat and I'll do my best to answer it and read it on air. Thanks so much. Now back to the show. So one of my favorite channels, the Society page, did a great video with Katie Cool Lady's channel. And for everyone asking for a collaboration, I am totally open, told Katie I'm down. It's really up to her whether she wants to do it. I'd love to do a collab, love to have her on this channel or do anything else that she's open to doing. So let us check out the Society page. This is their video on Charlie Adelson's arrest as described in Stephen Epstein's book, Extreme Punishment. Let's check it out together, shall we?
Yeah, I mean, it's like Dateline. Come on. Stephen Epstein is all over Dateline. Stephen, you didn't attend Charlie's trial. So not exactly up to speed with everything. It's like, dude. And I told that Dateline producer in the courtroom, I said, there's a lot of people here in this courtroom that are like, you know, covering this trial extensively that you might want to consider for your show. And one of them that was not was Stephen Epstein. But anyway, I'm not going to rip on him because...
What Katie's picking up on is a tension between alternative media or independent media that covers true crime cases, the tension and mainstream media. And there is no love lost between mainstream media and journalists who went to school for this and YouTubers and independent media who cover these cases. So they may know more, but mainstream media tends to prop up other mainstream media reporting. Love is a 4-letter word. Glad to have you on board. Piece of banana bread for you. Thank you so much for becoming a member. Back to Katie Kool-Lady and the great Society page's work on Charlie Adelson's arrest. Let's check it out.
We are going to go into the Charlie arrest details. Thank you for hanging in there with me and going all over the map with a million different things. Okay, Stephen Epstein in relationship to the Adelsons or Markels. He's not. He's a true crime author that got interested in this case, and he's met them and interviewed them. You know, he didn't know them like before or anything like that. So, are we ready for this? It's only.
I'd like to add that he's also a civil attorney, Stephen Epstein.
A little longer than 2 pages, but it's juicy. Yeah, Irene, I thought it also was a good read. I know this book is controversial and he's controversial, and I am a little bit annoyed that they had him on so much on Dateline. Yes, he did write this book on it, but he didn't attend Charlie's trial. So, I mean, like, anyway, I'm not going to rip on him. Yes, story time. This is like reading story time. So, we ready? It was at 2518 Whale Harbor Lane. Well aware that Charlie Adelson was a rabid gun enthusiast who had no reservation or compunction about taking human life, those responsible for the operation at his Fort Lauderdale home the next morning weren't about to take any chances. They assembled a well-trained, heavily armed battalion in full riot gear to take the newly indicted defendant into custody. Approximately 20 FBI agents and local police officers gathered a couple of blocks away just before 5 a.m. to receive their final instructions, the cover of darkness, an element of surprise, offering a tactical advantage they hoped would prevent a shootout and bloody scene. Gradually, they surrounded the home from all sides, sealing off the perimeter. A couple of agents even stationed aboard a boat behind the property to prevent any attempted watery escape. Though movement was detected through Charlie's windows, agents couldn't determine whether the darkened figure was a male or female. Officers positioned behind the rear fence were given the go-ahead to advance. But when they attempted to scale the fence, they were met with a most unwelcome surprise. It was lined at the top with razor wire, leading to some nasty cuts and the decision to retreat. Their initial plan foiled, the lead agent dialed Charlie on his cell phone to try to coax him to surrender peacefully. But no one answered. Floodlights were then directed against the front of the home, brightly illuminated the entire property and shining into the residence through the windows. An agent grabbed a bullhorn, demanding that Charlie come out with his hands held high.
Come on down! You're the next contestant on The Price is Right!
Several officers crouched in defensive positions throughout the front yard, their weapons aimed at the front door, the tension and anticipation reaching a crescendo, yet nothing happened. Storming the door with massive force was beginning to look like their only viable option despite its attendant risks. The lead agent tried calling Charlie one final time before resorting to that approach.
Hey guys.
Lo and behold, this time he answered and walked out the front door precisely as instructed. Rather than a man itching for confrontation or a bloody shootout, what officers observed emerging into the ultra-bright lights was a most amusing sight. Not only was Charlie unarmed, he was nearly naked, a pair of skimpy boxer shorts the only fabric covering his large frame. Shielding his eyes from the glaring light with his forearm, bewildered and confused, he asked, "Am I under arrest?" Officers quickly swarmed him, cuffing his hands behind his back and reading him his rights. They led him back inside to find some clothing and get him dressed. What the arresting officers spotted through their peripheral vision as they walked their prize through his living space revealed just how lucky they were to nab him without a full-scale battle. Rifles and guns were displayed everywhere, mostly near windows and doors, one even resting on a tripod pointed out a window. The entire operation could have easily devolved into a very different and deadly scene. Charlie appeared dazed and disoriented as the officers led him through the house, incoherent gibberish his only audible sounds, likely because he was under the influence of marijuana or some other narcotic. Finally, fully clothed and ready for prime time, the handcuffed arrestee was marched back outside, flanked by officers who'd likely remember this particular perp walk for years. As they approached a squad car, placed Charlie in the back seat, one of the agents standing nearby was soaking in the spectacle with particular intense interest. Here he comes, Pat Sanford. Had waited nearly 8 years for this very occasion, gladly making the 7-hour drive from Tally with the freshly issued indictment in hand to witness Charlie's arrest with his own 2 eyes. His hard work and that of dozens of federal agents and TPD investigators had finally paid off. For him, the moment was akin to winning the Super Bowl and the World Series all at once. Within minutes, the police car containing the perceived mastermind behind Dan Markel's vicious slaying was on its way to Broward County Jail, the same facility where Sigfredo Garcia, Luis Rivera, and Katie Magdanoa had all passed through during each one's years-long march to justice.
A Fort Lauderdale dentist is charged in connection with the 2014 murder of his brother-in-law, who was a professor at Florida State University.
By 9 a.m., news of Charlie Adelson's arrest was reverberating all across the internet, as was the mugshot snapped while he was being processed at the jail. In the photo, his curly brown hair was so long and disheveled, flying wildly in every direction. It wasn't even fully captured in the square frame. His green eyes were bloodshot and glassy, face devoid of expression, beard unkempt, lips pressed tightly together. Hardly the image the 45-year-old millionaire bachelor or his proud parents and kid sister would have selected to be featured in the Miami Herald or on the TV news later that day. Fully 2,834 days since the brutal, cold-blooded execution of his ex-brother-in-law, the maestro was finally behind bars, his life a Ferrari-driving, steroid-ingesting, playboy periodontist seemingly gone for good. Isn't that good? Feel-good story of the year. I mean, you got to admit, that's juicy. No, the way he's describing it, of like, when Charlie comes out and what he says, it's almost like, did he see some body cam video? He did interview people that were on the scene for that arrest, for that chapter. I remember he said that. I know, it's juicy, right?
Hello, this is a prepaid collect call from
Charlie. Like, if someone's burglarizing your property and you're fear for your life, you can shoot them. This wasn't a burglary. This was semi-automatic rifles and SWAT team had this. It was so stupid. They could have just, if they would just knocked on my door, I would have come right out. No, I mean, I could have easily been shot. I could have easily thought I was catching a burglar. Meanwhile, they thought I was coming at them. Just misunderstanding, How many of these guys, if they think they have a burglar in their backyard, they get to come out, armed and ready?
Because if you look at the time, it's clear that
Okay. Such a fan of the Society Pages channel. I can't tell you. If you're not subscribed, you are missing out. So, got a few questions here. Shari Davis, thank you so much. I don't understand how Wendi has immunity, yet we're all waiting for Wendi's arrest. I hear she can be charged with perjury, which is like 3 cherries on top. Well, her immunity only covers what she testified to in trial. So it means that she can't be in a worse position had she taken the 5th than had she testified. So, so they can't use her testimony to investigate anything. They can't use her testimony to charge her with anything, but there's a lot of evidence outside her testimony. But to get rid of any of those issues, I think you can go to her testimony and there are easily provable lies in there. The problem is in any perjury case, proving that she intentionally lied on the stand and that she doesn't have a poor memory, or she lied by accident, or she didn't realize she wasn't, it was her memory of it and she didn't realize. So that's the challenge there. But as anyone who's familiar with this case can see, or I think my view of the case is, I think that's a better way to put it. I think it's obvious that Wendi was involved. No one else knew Dan's schedule, her behavior driving by the crime scene. Her behavior afterwards is totally odd. Her police interview is bizarre. And she cries hysterically 1 minute and snaps out of it the next minute, which is not congruent with what we know about human beings and hysterical crying. Mariposa, thank you. Just became a new member. Thank you for becoming a member. We've hit over 50 members. I'm so thrilled that you guys are enjoying the episodes, and thank you for supporting the channel. Appreciate it so much. Tomorrow, but just before I close up this episode, someone asked, first of all, Sunny Taylor said she attended Charlie's trial and she told Pat Sanford that the internet loved him, which is so true. And what commitment to come back from retirement to personally arrest Donna. Wow. That's someone with their heart and soul in the case. Before I close up today's episode with a victim impact statement, like I usually do, wanted to say, unfortunately, tomorrow, Super Bowl Sunday, no show tomorrow. I am having, or my boyfriend is having a Super Bowl party, and I just don't know any way I can do a show with a whole party going on. Unfortunately, I don't have a studio. I just have an apartment. I think it would be a little nuts. But stay tuned to my community tab. If I get suddenly enlightened some way, I can do it. I just don't think I can right now. So I'll see you guys Monday. But before I go, I wanted to start with the first letter. And this was written on September 27th, 2019. And it begins, Dear Judge Hankinson, we, Jill Goldenzeal Goldpine and Michael Pine Goldpine, submit this joint statement in hopes that some justice will be achieved in response to his horrible and untimely death of our beloved friend and colleague, Dan Markel. Michael met Dan during their first week of college in 1991. The start of their freshman year overlapped with the start of the Jewish New Year, and Michael had the first of what were many meals and conversations with Dan. They became good friends and kindred spirits. Dan was someone who loved to talk about ideas, unafraid to share his opinions, which Dan had on every topic, but always willing to listen, engage with opposing views. Dan was the most unapologetically intellectual person either of us has ever met. Dan loved ideas, people, and above all, talking with people about ideas. He was always destined to be a professor. With his green sport coat, he already dressed the part. It was no surprise that Dan chose to run Harvard's Hillel's Committee on Religious, Social, and Ethical Thought. He led dialogue between African Americans and Jews like an engaging and fascinating academic seminar. Along with Dan's erudite ideas came incredible warmth. No matter what, you would always have a place at his table, even if he was so busy with his students that he needed you to shop for the food and make the meal. He was the kind of person who was always there for his friends. Michael and Dan spent the year after graduation in Jerusalem. Throughout the years, they stayed in touch. Coincidentally, a few years later, Jill met Dan through the Alumni Association of the Dorrit Fellowship in Israel. Happily, Jill and Michael would then see Dan annually at the Dorrit Alumni Reunion. Both of us remember fondly how Dan immediately embraced Jill, both as Michael's partner and as a budding law professor herself. Starting that weekend, from that moment Jill told Dan that she wanted to be a law professor, Dan treated her as an equal colleague. He invited her to academic talks, traded ideas with her, and advised her about joining him in the legal academy. Jill was overwhelmed by his generosity and his knowledge of the field. Even before Jill became a professor, Dan asked Jill if she would like to post on his popular professional blog, Prof Blog. Stunned and flattered by this offer from a senior colleague, Jill followed up timidly. Dan's response was to hand her the password and tell her to submit posts anytime, and followed up again by helping her to do so. This type of generosity from a senior colleague is unmatched by any other professor. Jill has encountered in more than a decade of law teaching, Jill and Michael would see Dan at least once or twice a year. We would also keep in touch via Facebook and social media. Dan continued to mentor Jill professionally, and both of us engaged with him in online debates. We had enough frequency of contact that Jill still opens Facebook reflexively, expects to see a post from Dan, and immediately feels pierced by his absence. When our first child was born and Dan came to Boston for a conference, Michael took time away from work, and Jill, on maternity leave, pushed a stroller through heaps of snow to introduce Dan to our son. Dan had recently had a son as well, and we excitedly shared photos and looked forward to them playing together. We would always pick right back up where we left off in our friendship. Given the way all of us love to talk, we never expected our conversation to end. But 5 years ago, Dan's murder ended them forever. We will never get to speak to Dan again. We will not be meeting up the next time a legal academic conference comes to town. He will not be at the next door reunion or the one after that. We will not be losing track of time while our children play in the other room. Instead, there will be silence where there should have been argument and laughter. When we found out Dan was murdered, we were in shock and could not concentrate for days. The shock was instantly palpable in our extended professional and personal circle. The phones would not stop ringing, and the emails would not stop coming as we tried to digest this horror. Our entire community needed to grieve together. To help our community begin to heal, both of us organized a gathering of Dan's friends and colleagues in Cambridge. On just days of notice, dozens of people, some of whom had not seen Dan in years, and some who came from out of town, gathered at Harvard Hillel to mourn and share memories of Dan. This commitment from his friends was yet another testament to Dan's profound effect on his world. Dan's death has profoundly affected hundreds, if not thousands of people in our personal and professional circles. There is no punishment that will make us whole. None that will bring back the many hours with Dan that have been taken from us. Any sentence for those who took his life must reflect how much Dan's voice meant to the world and what was lost for so many when it was silenced. Sincerely, Jill Goldenpine and Michael Goldenpine. Thanks for listening. And got a comment. Holly Jackson, thanks so much. I love your show. Thank you so much. So glad you're enjoying it. I will be back Monday. Enjoy Super Bowl Sunday. please hit the thumbs up. Leave me a comment in the comment section. And I will be back with another episode Monday. See you guys then at 6 p.m. Eastern. Have a great night and a great weekend, everybody.